Dobro. History. Archive.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking on what might be the most analyzed, most debated, and most structurally flawed story in modern American history.
We are going back to November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas.
The assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Specifically, we're diving into the 6 seconds of the attack itself and why, even now, the story will just never close.
And that's really the core of it, isn't it? Everyone knows the outcome. But when you look at the primary sources, the physical evidence, the eyewitness reports, the government's own findings, they're just riddled with contradictions.
Deep contradictions. And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're not here to solve it. We're here to synthesize that raw, conflicting material to show you why the official story fractured almost from the moment it was created.
Exactly. We want to look at the cracks in the foundation itself, because you understand how the evidence was, let's say, corrupted, and how the conclusions were driven by political necessity. You start to understand why the skepticism that followed wasn't just paranoia.
It was rational.
It was a perfectly rational response to the information that was being presented.
So let's set the scene. Because the atmosphere of that day is such a stark contrast to what was about to happen.
It's a beautiful sunny day in Dallas. The motorcade is a celebration. And you have to understand, this wasn't just a friendly wave to the crowd. This was high-stakes politics.
Right. This trip had a very specific purpose.
A critical one. The Texas Democratic Party was tearing itself apart.
Yeah.
You had the conservative wing, led by Governor John Connally.
Who was in the car with him.
In the very same car, yes. And then you had the liberal faction, led by Senator Ralph Yarborough. They despised each other. JFK was there to play peacemaker, to smooth over those frictions, because he absolutely needed a united Texas to launch his 1964 re-election campaign.
So the whole thing was a performance, in a way, a show of unity.
And it was working. The crowds were enormous. Reports from the day described them as smiling and adoring. It looked like a total political triumph.
And for Jackie Kennedy, this was a big moment personally.
A huge moment. It was her first major public appearance since the death of their infant son, Patrick, just 3 months earlier. She'd been in a period of intense private grief.
And that detail about her suit, the pink suit.
It's iconic, but the story behind it is so telling. The president had specifically asked her to wear it. He knew the power of that image, the bright color, the style. It was all part of crafting this perfect picture of American glamour and optimism.
A picture that was about to be shattered, so they make that final turn onto Elm Street.
And the 6 seconds begin. Our goal now is to unpack all of it, the film, the sounds, the immediate aftermath, to see how that official story was built and why it started crumbling right away.
Okay, let's get into it. The critical moment. The motorcade is heading down that slight incline in Dealey Plaza toward the triple underpass. The time is 12:30 p.m.
The car is moving slowly. It's a 1961 Lincoln Continental convertible. In the back, JFK and Jackie. And in the jump seats, right in front of them, Governor John Connally and his wife, Nellie.
And Nellie Connally says something, the last happy word spoken in that car.
She turns back to the president, smiles, and says, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you."
And then it happens. History just freezes.
It really does. And our best record of that freeze frame is, of course, the Zapruder film.
Abraham Zapruder, a local dressmaker.
Right. He's just a citizen standing on a concrete pedestal with his 8mm Bell & Howell home movie camera. He has no idea he's about to capture the most studied, most debated piece of film in history.
486 frames, 26.6 seconds. That's it.
And that is the raw, agonizing data. The film shows it all. First, you see the president's hand suddenly fly up to his throat. He's been hit. Then, almost immediately, you see Governor Connally in front of him stiffen and slump over. He's clearly been hit, too.
But it's the final shot that everyone remembers, the one at frame 313.
The fatal shot. The president's head moves violently. And this is the key phrase, back and to the left.
Back and to the left.
Yeah.
And that single motion is where the first major crack in the official story appears. It's the Grassy Knoll paradox.
It's a fundamental problem of physics, right?
Yeah.
The official conclusion is that the shots came from the Texas School Book Depository, which was behind and above the limousine.
So a shot from behind should have pushed his head
forward. It should have propelled him forward. But the Zapruder film, the primary visual evidence, shows the exact opposite. A violent backward motion that strongly suggests a shot from the front.
From the area everyone now knows as the Grassy Knoll.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the film. The eyewitness accounts from the ground were chaotic, but a huge number of them were consistent on one thing.
The direction of the shots.
Yes, people swore they heard shots coming from the front, from that picket fence area on the Grassy Knoll. In the immediate confusion, you see police officers and spectators. They aren't running away from the depository building.
They're running towards the Grassy Knoll.
They're running towards it. They were convinced the shooter was there. So you have this massive immediate contradiction. The official story says the shots came from behind, but the film and hundreds of ears on the ground say they came from the front.
So how on earth could the official report just discount what so many people saw and heard with their own senses? It feels like you'd have to believe that hundreds of people were all wrong at the same time.
Well, this is where it gets really, really interesting. Because there's a scientific phenomenon that explains the confusion of the witnesses, even if their conclusion about the shooter's location was wrong. It's the acoustics explanation.
And this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is physics.
This is pure physics. The rifle used, that 6.5mm Mannlicher Carcano, fired a supersonic bullet.
Meaning it traveled faster than the speed of sound?
Significantly faster.
Yeah.
So imagine you're a witness standing on the curb. The bullet leaves the rifle in the depository behind you and travels across the plaza towards the underpass. For many of those witnesses, the shock wave created by that bullet breaking the sound barrier. It's called an N wave.
Okay.
That N wave reached their ears before the actual sound of the muzzle blast from the rifle did.
Wait, so they heard the bullet go by before they heard the gunfire?
Essentially, yes. Think of it like a fighter jet. The jet is long gone by the time you hear the sonic boom overhead. The boom is the shock cone hitting you. In Dealey Plaza, that N wave provided what acoustics experts later called erroneous information.
Erroneous information.
It told the witnesses where the bullet was at that moment, streaking past them toward the Grassy Knoll, not where the rifle was back in the depository. Their own ears tricked them into thinking the sound originated from the front.
That's incredible. So their senses weren't lying, but they were being misinterpreted because of the physics of the sound itself.
Precisely. And this is where the trust begins to break down. People were, in effect, being gaslit by science. They heard a sound from the front, they reacted instinctively. Then the government comes along later and says, no, you're all wrong. It came from behind you.
And naturally, people think it's a cover-up.
Of course they do, because you're asking them to doubt their own immediate visceral experience. That gap right there between human perception and complex physics, that is the soil where the entire conspiracy movement is born.
Let's shift perspective now to inside the motorcade, the Secret Service response. Agent Clint Hill.
Clint Hill was assigned to Jackie's detail. He was on the running board of the follow-up car, the Queen Mary.
So he's just feet behind the president.
Agonizingly close. He testified that he heard an explosive noise over his right shoulder. He turned, saw the president clutch his throat, and he just knew. His training took over.
And he ran.
He leaped off his car and sprinted towards the presidential limousine. But the cars were moving. It took him about 6 seconds to bridge that gap.
6 seconds. It must have felt like a lifetime.
He said for the rest of his life, he was stalked by guilt over those 6 seconds. He always felt he'd just been a second or two faster.
And as he's running, as he's scrambling onto the back of the limousine, the third shot hits.
Yes, he felt the impact. His testimony is just. It's brutal. He said the shot entered lower on the back of the head and blew out a section of his skull just behind and above the right ear. He saw everything. Blood, bone fragments, brain material.
And then in the middle of this horror, he sees Jackie.
He sees Jackie Kennedy in that pink suit climbing out of her seat and onto the trunk of the moving car.
His first thought must have been that she was trying to escape.
That's what he thought. But then he realized the awful truth. He said she was trying to reach some of the material that had come out of the president's head. She was instinctively trying to gather the pieces of her husband.
My God.
It's an almost unbelievable image of shock and devotion. Hill had to physically grab her, shove her back into the seat, right onto the president's body, and then throw his own body over them as a human shield.
And he gave the signal.
He looked back at the agents in the follow-up car and gave a single, devastating signal. A thumbs down. The mission was over.
From there, it's a race to Parkland Hospital. The chaos just transfers from the plaza to the emergency room.
It does. And we get this heartbreaking image from Lady Bird Johnson, who was in the car behind them. She describes seeing Jackie arrive at the hospital as a bundle of pink. Just her suit, her gloves, her legs, completely caked in her husband's blood.
And even in the trauma day, she wouldn't let him go.
She was draped over his body, just screaming, "They shot his head off. I love you, Jack." The doctors couldn't get to him at first. It was Agent Hill again who finally convinced her to step back, but only after he took off his own suit coat and used it to cover the massive hole in the president's head.
So the doctors in Trauma Room 1 finally get to work. And you have to remember, these are trauma surgeons. Their job isn't forensics. It's to save a life.
Exactly. And Dr. M.T. Jenkins' medical report from that day is chilling. He describes the head wound, a great laceration, a great defect in the skull plate, and brain matter, the cerebellum, actually protruding from the wound. It was catastrophic.
But amidst that horrific head wound, there was the other one, the first wound.
The one that caused JFK to raise his hands to his throat in the Zapruder film. It was a small, neat hole in his throat, right below the Adam's apple.
And this tiny detail, this small bullet hole, is where the evidence trail gets irrevocably corrupted.
It is the single most critical moment in the forensic history of the case. A young surgeon, Dr. Malcolm O'Perry, is trying to save the president. And in his initial press conferences, right after they pronounced him dead,
He talks to the press.
yes, and he describes that small throat wound as a possible entry wound,
An entry wound from the front.
which would have perfectly matched the Zapruder film's backward motion and the eyewitness accounts of shots from the Grassy Knoll.
Yeah.
You had a medical professional on the record providing potential physical evidence of a frontal shot.
But then we have what you call the tragedy of circumstance.
That's the only way to describe it. Dr. Perry's job was not to preserve a crime scene. His job was to save the patient. The president couldn't breathe. His airway was compromised. The standard, immediate, necessary medical procedure was to perform an emergency tracheotomy.
And to do that, he made the incision.
Directly through that very bullet hole. He used the hole as a guide to open the airway.
So a desperate, life-saving act completely destroyed the primary forensic evidence for that wound.
It obliterated it. Later that night, when the official autopsy was done at Bethesda Naval Hospital, the pathologist there never saw the small, neat hole Dr. Perry had described. All they saw was a wide, messy, surgical incision.
And the importance of that cannot be overstated.
It's everything. Because the Warren Commission needed that wound to be an exit wound to support their lone gunman theory. A shot from behind had to exit from the front. But with the original hole gone, they could just interpret the surgical site as an exit. The physical evidence that pointed to a frontal shot had been wiped clean by a scalpel.
The single cut is what makes the whole magic bullet theory even possible later on.
It's the linchpin. Without that altered evidence, the single bullet theory doesn't get off the ground.
And at 1:00 p.m., President John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. The medical tragedy was over, but the forensic tragedy was just beginning. So while all this is happening at Parkland, the investigation is zeroing in on the Texas School Book Depository.
Right. A witness named Howard Brennan had told police he saw a man with a rifle in a 6th-floor window. So police raced to the building.
And they find what looks like a slam dunk case.
It really does on the surface. On the 6th floor, in the southeast corner overlooking Dealey Plaza, they find a sniper's perch, a wall of stacked boxes creating a perfect hidden vantage point.
And the evidence is right there.
3 spent 6.5mm rifle shell casings on the floor. And then, tucked behind another sack of boxes, they find the weapon itself, a 6.5mm Mannlicher Carcano rifle.
Which they quickly trace to an employee who works there, Lee Harvey Oswald.
And we should just pause on that rifle for a second. The Mannlicher Carcano was not some high-end sniper rifle. It was a cheap Italian military surplus weapon. It was notorious for being unreliable, having a rough bolt action, and it was very difficult to fire accurately in quick succession.
Which becomes a huge problem later on when they try to explain the timing of the shots.
A massive problem. The idea that one person could get off 3 well-aimed shots in under 6 seconds with that particular rifle is, well, it's a stretch for even a trained marksman.
So Oswald is their man. But then a second crime happens that seems to seal the deal.
About 45 minutes after the assassination, at 1:16 p.m., a Dallas police officer, J.D. Tippit, is shot and killed in the Oak Cliff neighborhood.
And witnesses link that shooting to Oswald.
Yes. Witnesses saw the killer flee the scene and duck into the nearby Texas Theater without paying for a ticket. So police swarm the theater.
And they find him inside.
Officer Nick McDonald spots him. As he approaches, Oswald jumps up, there's a struggle, and he shouts, "This is it," before pulling a .38 revolver. They manage to subdue him and arrest him.
So on paper, it looks like an open and shut case. You're the guy who worked in the building, who owned the rifle, who murdered a cop while escaping.
It's a neat, tidy narrative of a lone, disgruntled killer. But then the Dallas police make a decision that completely shatters that tidiness.
They parade him in front of the press.
A total media circus. They march him down the hallways of the police station. Reporters are shouting questions. Flashbulbs are going off everywhere. It's pure chaos.
In the middle of that chaos, Oswald shouts back.
He shouts back the 5 words that ignite the entire conspiracy movement. He yells, "I'm just a patsy."
A patsy. Someone being framed.
Exactly. He doesn't just say, "I'm innocent" or "I didn't do it." He introduces a very specific counter-narrative, that he is a pawn, a decoy, set up to take the fall for a much larger plot.
And that one statement, from the only suspect they have, is the moment the official story first fractures in the public mind.
It's a devastating blow to the lone gunman narrative, because now the public is asking, a patsy for whom? He was the one and only person who could explain why his rifle was there, who could explain his movements, who could give meaning to that claim. He held all the cards.
And just 2 days later, that key was silenced. Permanently.
On live television. It's Sunday, November 24th. The Dallas police decide to transfer Oswald from the city jail to the county jail. And for some reason, they decide to broadcast it.
A live television event.
The basement of the police station is packed with reporters and cameras. Oswald, handcuffed to a detective, steps out into the bright lights. And suddenly, a man in a dark suit lunges out from the crowd.
Jack Ruby.
Jack Ruby! He fires a single shot from a .38 revolver, point blank, into Oswald's abdomen. And the whole country watches it happen.
The one man who could explain everything is murdered live on national TV. The chain of accountability is just snapped.
Instantly and irrevocably broken. The possibility of a trial, of a public accounting of the facts, of cross-examination, it all dies with Oswald in that basement.
So the question immediately becomes, who is Jack Ruby, and how did he get down there?
Well, the simple story was that he was a local nightclub owner, a bit of a character around town who liked to kibitz with cops. He knew people. He could wander in and out of the station without raising too many eyebrows.
And his stated motive was patriotism.
A sort of twisted patriotism. He told the press he was just so distraught over JFK's death. He said he wanted to redeem the city of Dallas. And the strangest reason of all, he said he wanted to save Mrs. Kennedy the discomfiture of coming back to trial.
A grieving vigilante, that was the story.
That was the story the Warren Commission ultimately adopted. But the details about Ruby's life just don't fit that neat little box.
This is where the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the HSCA, comes back in. They dig deeper into Ruby years later.
And they find some very troubling connections. They discover that in the months leading up to the assassination, Ruby's long-distance phone activity jumped significantly.
And who was he calling?
Known mobsters. People with ties to organized crime figures in Chicago and New Orleans. These were crime syndicates that had a clear motive to get rid of the Kennedys because of Attorney General Robert Kennedy's relentless war on the mob.
But the Warren Commission basically ignored all that.
They minimized it. They concluded he acted alone, on impulse. They needed to keep the story contained. The conspiracy to silence a patsy was just too explosive.
But the most bizarre detail comes from Ruby himself during his testimony to the commission.
This part is just incredible. He doesn't just stick to his patriotic story. He begs them. He begs Chairman Earl Warren to give him a polygraph test. Or even truth serum, he says, to prove what motivated me to do what I did.
Why would a man with a simple, noble motive ask for a lie detector test?
It makes no sense, does it? It strongly suggests that either he was being forced to stick to a story he knew was false, or that the real reasons were so complex and dangerous that he couldn't articulate them freely. He needed them to make him tell the truth. They declined.
And then, like Oswald, Ruby is also silenced before he can ever truly talk.
He was convicted, the conviction was appealed, but before a new trial could take place, he died of cancer in 1967. The second person who held the key to the mystery was gone. The narrative was locked down.
So, with both Oswald and Ruby dead, the new president, Lyndon Johnson, creates the Warren Commission to give the country the definitive story. But they immediately hit a wall. A huge one.
A wall made of physics and timing. It all goes back to the Zapruder film. The film shows Kennedy and Connally being hit almost simultaneously. We're talking fractions of a second apart.
But the rifle couldn't fire that fast.
Not even close. FBI tests on Oswald's bolt-action Mannlicher Carcano showed it took a minimum of 2.25 seconds to fire, cycle the bolt, re-aim through that cheap scope, and fire again.
So the math just doesn't work. There wasn't enough time for Oswald to fire 2 separate shots to hit both men that quickly.
The math completely fails the lone gunman theory. So the commission was faced with a choice. They could either admit there must have been a second shooter,
Which means a conspiracy.
or they could find a way to make one bullet do the work of two. The entire investigation was driven by the structural imperative to prove Oswald acted alone. Therefore, those two injuries had to be from one bullet.
And so the single bullet theory is born, a theory that critics rightly called a hypothesis born of necessity.
Absolutely. Because if this theory is false, the entire official story collapses. It's the load-bearing wall of the Warren Report.
And the evidence for this theory is one single bullet. Commission Exhibit 399. The magic bullet.
A bullet that, crucially, wasn't found in a body during an autopsy. It was supposedly found on Governor Connolly's stretcher at Parkland Hospital after he'd been wheeled out. The chain of custody was questionable from the start.
Okay, so let's walk through the incredible journey the Warren Commission said this one bullet took. It's almost unbelievable.
You really have to trace the path to appreciate the sheer implausibility. So according to the commission, this one bullet did 8 things. First, it enters President Kennedy's back near the base of his neck.
Okay, number 1.
2, it passes through his neck, nicking a vertebra on the way. 3, it exits from the front of his throat.
Conveniently right where Dr. Perry made the tracheotomy incision.
Exactly. So that wound is now an exit wound. But the bullet is still going. Now it has to hit Governor Connolly, who is sitting lower and more to the center than Kennedy, so it has to change direction midair.
It's already starting to sound magical.
We're just getting started. 4, it strikes Connolly in his back on the right side.
Yeah.
5, it travels through his chest and completely shatters his 5th rib. That's solid bone.
A shattered rib. The bullet must be deforming at this point.
You would think. 6, it exits the front of his chest just below his right nipple. But it's still not done.
What else could it possibly do?
7, it smashes into Connolly's right wrist, breaking the radius bone. Another solid bone broken. And finally, 8, it embeds itself shallowly in his left thigh, where it later falls out onto the stretcher.
7 wounds, 2 broken bones, 2 men, 1 bullet.
And this is the punchline. This is what made the theory a subject of ridicule. After doing all of that, what did the bullet, CE-399, look like when they found it?
It must have been a mangled piece of lead.
It was found in near-perfect condition. The official reports describe it as having almost no deformation. It was barely even flattened. It looked more like a bullet that had been fired into a block of gelatin than one that had shattered 2 bones.
It defies physics.
It completely defies the laws of ballistics. And that's why public skepticism became so entrenched. You were asking people to believe something that their common sense told them was physically impossible.
And the people who were actually in the car, Connolly and his wife, they never bought it.
Never for a second. They were adamant their entire lives. They insisted they heard 3 distinct shots, and that the shot that hit the president was separate from the one that hit the governor. The primary witnesses flatly contradicted the theory that was created to save the official story.
So the Warren Report comes out in 1964. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Case closed. But nobody bought it.
Not really. The public rejection was immediate and massive. Polls showed most Americans believed there was a conspiracy, and by 1976, that number was up to 81%. The distrust wasn't just some fringe belief. It was the mainstream consensus.
And that public pressure eventually forces the government to reinvestigate.
Yes, in the late 70s, Congress forms the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the HSCA. They re-examine everything, spurred on by the Zapruder film finally being shown to the public.
And their conclusion
It was a bombshell. It directly contradicted the Warren Commission. The HSCA found that, based on scientific acoustical evidence, a police dictabelt recording from that day, there was a high probability that at least 2 gunmen fired at the president.
2 gunmen. So they officially concluded it was a conspiracy.
Their final report stated that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy.
So just stop and think about that. You have the U.S. government's first official investigation concluding lone gunmen, and the U.S. government's second official investigation concluding probable conspiracy.
It's a war of truths, fought by the government against itself. How is the public supposed to have faith in any official narrative when the official narratives don't even agree with each other? It creates a vacuum where no source is credible.
And to make it even worse, that acoustic evidence the HSCA used, it was later challenged.
Exactly. Other scientists and even the FBI later argued that the sounds in the dictabelt were likely just police radio static, not gunshots. So the very evidence used to prove the conspiracy was then itself thrown into doubt. It's just layers upon layers of uncertainty.
And that uncertainty is only fed by the continued secrecy.
It is. Oliver Stone's movie JFK in 1992 caused such a public furor that Congress passed the JFK Assassination Records Collection Act. The whole point was to force the release of all the secret documents.
But that hasn't happened.
Not fully. Here we are all these decades later, and records are still being withheld, still being redacted by intelligence agencies. Every time a deadline passes and documents remain secret, it just reinforces the belief that there's a dark truth being protected.
Which brings us to the final and maybe the most powerful piece of evidence from that day, the pink suit.
A silent witness to the entire event. 2 hours after the assassination, Lyndon Johnson is being sworn in as president on Air Force One. And standing next to him, stone-faced, is Jackie Kennedy.
Still in that suit.
Still in the suit, which is now completely caked and stained with her husband's blood.
And Lady Bird Johnson tried to help her change.
She did. She offered her a fresh dress, but Jackie refused with what was described as almost fierceness.
And her reason.
Yeah.
Her reason was a statement in itself.
It was a deliberate act of bearing witness. She said, "I want them to see what they have done to Jack." She wore that blood-soaked suit all the way back to Washington. She didn't take it off until the next morning. It was a nonverbal accusation to the entire world.
And that suit, that piece of history, where is it now?
It's the National Archives, perfectly preserved in a climate-controlled vault, still uncleaned. But here is the final, crushing irony of the whole story of secrecy.
It's not on display.
It's hidden from public view. By a specific request from the Kennedy family, that suit, the most visceral, truthful, undeniable relic of that day, is sealed away from the public until the year 2103. So the most powerful piece of physical evidence is locked away for 140 years. That's the perfect metaphor. The physical trauma is hidden from view, just like the official truth remains hidden in redacted documents. The evidence is as sealed as the explanation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that the official story has these fundamental structural flaws at every single step.
Absolutely. You start with the acoustic trick, the N wave, which created hundreds of honest but mistaken eyewitnesses, breeding instant distrust.
Then you have the tragic, accidental corruption of the evidence at Parkland when the tracheotomy destroyed the one wound that could have pointed to a second shooter.
Then the physically impossible magic bullet theory, a conclusion that was born of necessity, forcing the public to accept something that defied common sense and physics.
And finally, the perfect, televised silencing of the one man who called himself a patsy, followed by the death of his killer. The motives were buried forever.
What the sources show us is that being truly informed about this event isn't about finding a neat answer. It's about understanding why no neat answer is possible. The doubt was built into the investigation from the very first moments.
The contradictions are not a bug. They're the entire feature of the story. The conflict between the Warren report and the HSCA report proves that even the government couldn't settle on a single truth.
The skepticism was, and remains, a rational response to a structurally unsound narrative.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought. The most powerful, most honest, and most visceral piece of evidence from November 22nd, 1963, Jackie Kennedy's blood-caked pink suit, is locked away until 2103. It's hidden, just like so many of the official documents still are. So what does it say about our history and about our trust in institutions when the most profound evidence of a national trauma must be shielded from public view for nearly a century and a half? What happens to the truth when the things that prove it are locked in a vault?